My name is Helena Mercer. I was 29 years old the year my dad died and left me a closet. 3 weeks after the funeral, I drove home from a day shift in Knoxville, put my key in the front door of the house on Poplar Street, and it would not turn. New deadbolt, bright brass, still shiny. The packaging was in the trash can at the end of the driveway, and my brother was sitting in his work truck across the street with the engine running, waiting for me to figure it out. 6 boxes sat on the porch under a blue tarp because it had been raining since noon. That was the whole inheritance. A closet, 6 boxes, and a tarp somebody else had thought to put there. What I did about it took me 6 months, cost me my job, and started with a stranger on a porch who knew the exact date my mother died. The copy of the will came in a manila envelope from the probate clerk. I read it in the parking lot at work with my headset still around my neck. 3 pages. My dad's signature on the last one, small and cramped. Nothing like the signature I had watched him put on invoices my whole life. My brother Dale's name was on every line that mattered. The house at 118 Poplar Street, the shop, the trucks, the accounts, the equipment, the name on the sign. Then there was one line for me near the bottom in the same flat language as the rest. To my daughter Helena Ruth Mercer, the contents of the closet in the front bedroom. I read that line 4 times. I kept waiting for it to say something else. The closet in the front bedroom held a vacuum, a box of Christmas lights, and my winter coat. My father had spent his last months in a bed I moved into the dining room so he would not have to climb stairs, and he had thought about that closet, and he had written it down, and somebody had typed it up and made it legal. The part that stopped me was the date. The will had been signed on the 22nd of December, 11 weeks before he died. In the middle of the stretch he spent at the skilled nursing facility, the stretch where he called me Ruth twice and did not know he had done it. I put the pages back in the envelope. Here is what I did for a living, and it matters later. I was a medical billing and collection specialist. 7 years, 3rd desk from the window. My job was the part nobody thinks about. Somebody has a heart attack, somebody gets a bill, and eventually somebody like me calls them. I knew that system the way a mechanic knows a transmission. I knew a self-pay balance goes to charge off at 210 days. I knew that every quarter the finance office bundled the charged-off accounts into a portfolio and sold the whole batch to a debt buyer for pennies on the dollar. I knew who signed off on the sale and what week it usually happened. I moved back into the house on Poplar Street in January, 8 weeks after my dad's first surgery. I stayed 14 months. I learned how to change a bed with a person still in it. I learned that congestive heart failure is not one big event. It is 400 small ones, and most of them happen between 2 and 4 in the morning. I kept a spiral notebook on the kitchen counter with his doses in it. Times down the left side, initials down the right. Because writing something down is how I love people. My brother came on Saturdays. He brought a bakery box and he stayed about 40 minutes, and he always said the same thing on his way out, that he had a job bidding Monday. I never held that against him then. The shop was real, the payroll was real, and somebody had to keep the lights on out there. In February my dad had a good week. He sat up, he ate a whole plate. He watched 2 hours of a fishing show and told me the guy was lying about the depth. On the Thursday of that week he looked at me while I was writing in the notebook and he said, "You have always been good at the paperwork part." I laughed. I honestly took it as a compliment. It took me until that manila envelope 13 months later to hear it the other way, which is that in his mind the paperwork was my part, and the house was Dale's. The locks got changed on the 4th of April. I had worked a half shift. I stopped at the pharmacy for a prescription that was not mine anymore, which is a stupid thing that happens after somebody dies, and then I drove the 4 minutes home. The tarp was the first thing I saw. Blue, cheap, weighted at the corners with bricks in a coffee can, spread over 6 boxes stacked against the porch rail. My coat sleeve was hanging out of one of them. The doorknob was new, and the deadbolt was new, and there was a strip of paper stuck to the glass with a lock code on it which nobody had bothered to peel off. I stood there with my key in my hand for about a minute. I did not knock. I did not yell his name. I counted the boxes because 6 is a number and numbers hold still. And because if I started doing anything else on that porch, I was not going to stop. 14 months of my life had been packed into 6 boxes by somebody who was not there for any of it. His truck was across the street with the engine running and the driver's window down, and he had been sitting there long enough that the wipers were going on the low setting for no reason. He got out when I turned around. He had his good jacket on. That is how I knew he had rehearsed it. Dale is 7 years older than me, and he has never once raised his voice at me, which people find hard to believe. He talks the way he writes an estimate. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps in the rain, and he told me the funeral had cost $4,200 and that he had paid it out of the shop account. He told me Mercer Heating and Air was carrying $190,000 in debt that Dad had signed for and never mentioned. He told me the house had a line of credit against it that he did not know about until March. He said none of that like a man making excuses. He said it like a man reading a bid sheet to a customer who is not going to like the number. Then he told me he needed me out because he could not have a second household in a property he was trying to clean up. And I asked him where exactly he expected me to go, and he looked at the tarp and not at me. "Nobody owes you a house for showing up," he said. I remember the rain on the tarp more than I remember my own face doing whatever it did. I asked him one question. I asked whether Dad had ever had money he did not tell us about. He said no. He said it fast, faster than a person says no when the answer is just no. The way you slam a screen door when a wasp is coming in. Then he picked up 2 of my boxes and carried them to my car, which I think in his mind made it a kindness. I found 214 Hillrest Lane through a paper sign stapled to a phone pole. $650 a month, 2 bedrooms, a carport with no car in it, and a screen door that did not latch. The living room floor sloped toward the southeast corner hard enough that an orange would roll, slow at first and then with purpose. There was a smell under the kitchen sink that I chased for 3 days before I found the cracked trap. The landlord was a decent man in his 60s named Gil, who told me straight out that the foundation had a pier problem and that he was not going to fix it, and that the price reflected it. I appreciated him for that. He was the first person in a month who told me the truth about a number. Deposit first month, and the utility hookups took $1,950. That left me $4,100, which had taken me 6 years to save, and which I had been quietly proud of. I moved myself in on the 5th of April with a hand truck I borrowed from work. I put my mother's blue sweater in the top drawer and my dad's notebook of doses in the bottom one. And then I stood in the kitchen at 11 at night wiping out cabinets that had somebody else's shelf paper in them. And I noticed that I felt something close to fine. That was the part that scared me. Somewhere around the second cabinet, I realized somebody was watching me through the window over the sink. Across the street on the porch of the little brick house, an old woman was standing in the dark, and she had been standing there long enough that it was not an accident. She came over the next morning with a cookie tin, which is the oldest currency there is in East Tennessee. Her name was Ivy Poe. She was 78. She walked with a cane and she took the 2 porch steps one at a time with a lot of engineering. I made instant coffee because that was all I had unpacked. She looked around the kitchen, said Gil should be ashamed of that floor, and then she stopped talking mid-sentence and looked at my collarbone. I was wearing the only thing of my mother's I have ever had, a thin chain with 2 things on it. A small wedding band, too small for any finger I own, and a worn saint medal. Ivy set her cup down. She did not ask me a question, she told me. "You were born on the 22nd of May, she said, "and your mother died right after, didn't she?" My hands went cold in a way I have only felt twice in my life. I asked her how she could possibly know that. She said my name out loud then, both parts, like she was checking it against something in a drawer in her head. Then she said, "I cleaned that house on Poplar for 2 years, 96 and 97. I dusted around that necklace when your mother took it off to wash dishes." I stood there with a cookie tin in my hand and a slanted floor under me, and a woman I had known for 11 minutes describing my mother's hands. And then Ivy Poe said the thing that turned the next 6 months of my life sideways. She said, "Honey, I was standing in that kitchen the afternoon your mother signed." I asked her, "Signed what?" She looked at me for a long moment and she said, "You don't know, do you?" We went to her kitchen because her chairs were better. Ivy Poe told it slow, the way people her age tell things with the wrong details first. In the winter of 1997, my mother, Ruth, was 7 months along with me, and she was scared. A doctor in Knoxville had told her the placenta was sitting low and that there was a real risk of hemorrhage. My mother had come home from that appointment and sat at the kitchen table with her coat still on. Ivy remembered the coat. She remembered that Ruth had a piece of land, 11 acres out toward Lake City, that she had gotten from her own mother. She had sold it that fall to a man who wanted to put a garage on it. My father never liked that she sold it. Then on a Tuesday afternoon in February, a man came to the house with a briefcase and a stamp and a leather pad. And my mother signed papers at the kitchen table on Poplar Street while Ivy Poe ran the vacuum in the next room and tried not to listen. My father was not there. He was out at Oliver Springs putting a furnace in a church. And Ivy said that very carefully, like a woman who has thought about the timing of that for a long time. I asked her the only question that mattered. What did she sign? Ivy pressed her thumb into the tablecloth and thought. I only ever heard the one name, she said. It was on the man's folder. Clinch Valley. Clinch Valley Bank and Trust stopped existing in 2004. That is the thing about small banks in small towns. They get eaten, and then the thing that ate them gets eaten. And by the time you come looking, there is nobody at any counter who has ever heard the name. But chasing a file through 3 companies is not a mystery. It is a Tuesday at my job. It is exactly what I did all day, every day for 7 years. It took 4 weeks and 11 phone calls and 2 written requests with a copy of my ID and my mother's death certificate stapled behind. On a Thursday in May, a woman in an archive office in Nashville put me on hold for 9 minutes and came back and said the sentence I have not forgotten. We do show a trust, she said. It's not ours anymore. That book went to Fairlane. Fairlane Trust Services is on the 4th floor of a building in Nashville. They wanted my birth certificate, a state ID, my mother's death certificate, and a written request signed and dated. 3 days later, a woman named Priscilla Hodges called me back at 4 in the afternoon while I was in the parking lot at work. And she was so calm about it that I had to ask her to repeat herself. It existed. The Ruth Vance Mercer Trust, established the 11th of February 1997, funded with $46,000. Beneficiary listed as my child, born or unborn. My mother had written me into a legal document before I had a name, before anybody knew what I was, in a room where my father was not standing. I sat in my car with the engine off and the phone against my ear, and I made a sound I am not going to try to describe. And then Priscilla, being helpful, being thorough, added one more thing off the top of the file in the pleasant voice of a person reading a note that means nothing to her. Your father was notified in 2015 when we took the book over. There's a signed receipt in here. I drove to Ivy Poe's house that night and I was not kind about it. I asked her how a person keeps a thing like that to herself for 29 years while a kid grows up 2 miles away. She did not get defensive. She got up, poured coffee, neither of us drank, and told me about her son. Dwayne Poe broke his spleen in 1998 in a wreck on Highway 25. He was 19 and he had no insurance. The bill was $2,600, which in 1998 for a woman who cleaned houses was the end of the world. My father paid it. He never said a word about it to anybody. And he never brought it up again. Not once, not in 27 years. Ivy said in this county that is not a favour, that is a debt. I asked her what changed. She said Dwayne died last May, kidney trouble, 46 years old. She said, the man I owed is gone and the boy I owed him for is gone and I am 78 and I am not carrying it any further. Then she looked at the necklace again. Your mother signed that paper with you still inside her, she said. She did that alone in a kitchen on a Tuesday, so don't you sit in my house and ask me if she loved you. The copy of the trust document came in the mail 8 days later, 41 pages. The trust was real. $46,000 in 1997, managed conservatively by 3 institutions in a row, was worth about $214,000 in 2026. It was also completely, legally, permanently out of my hands. There was a spendthrift clause, which means neither a creditor nor the beneficiary can reach the principal. My mother put that in on purpose, and I understand exactly why. The trustee had full discretion. Distributions were limited to health, education, maintenance, and support. The principal did not come to me outright until I turned 35, 6 more years. I read those pages 3 times, and then I laughed out loud in an empty house, because my mother had reached across 29 years to hand me something, and the thing she handed me was a locked door with a note on it. Finding money is not the same as having money. There was one narrow door in those 41 pages, and it was the word support. I wrote to Priscilla Hodges and I asked for a discretionary distribution. I did not tell her my feelings. I gave her a rent figure, a utilities figure, a student loan statement, and a 1-page timeline. 15 days later, the committee approved $18,500 for maintenance and support. I paid off my student loan the same afternoon. $14,200 gone in about 90 seconds on a website. 7 years of my life closed out by a green check mark. It did not feel like winning. It felt like somebody unbuckled a strap I had stopped noticing I was wearing. I asked the second question, which was the real one. I asked whether the trust could fund attorney's fees to contest my father's will. The answer came in writing 2 days later, and it was 1 sentence long. Litigation costs do not fall within the health, education, maintenance, and support standard, and the trustee declines. So there it was. My mother's money could keep me fed and housed. It could not buy me a lawyer. It could not buy me the house. I sat with my bank balance on the screen that night, $8,381. And for the first time since I was 22 years old, I did not owe anybody anything. On a rainy Tuesday in July, I drove past 118 Poplar Street, and there was a 20-yard construction dumpster in the driveway. The front door was standing open. 2 men were pulling carpet out of the living room in long grey strips. The house smelled like tack strip and old dust. I went straight to the kitchen because that is what I came for. The doorframe between the kitchen and the hall was still there. 20-some pencil marks up the left side. The oldest one's down at knee height and gone soft. The newest one's sharp. Dale's marks all the way up past my head, dated in my father's handwriting. And then mine. 6 of them spread out over 10 years, the last one at the top with the date beside it in that cramped block print he used on invoices. H95. My name is not on the deed, it is not on the will, it is not on the sign at the shop or on any account or on one page of anything my family ever owned. It is on that doorframe in pencil, 4 feet 9 inches off the floor, because one time in 2005 my dad stood me up against a wall and made a line and wrote down that I existed. I put my thumb on it and held it there. I took nothing. I paid $200 for 45 minutes with an estate attorney in Oak Ridge, and it was the best $200 I have ever spent. She told me the truth quickly. In Tennessee, a parent can disinherit an adult child. Full stop. To break a will, I would have to prove either that he lacked capacity when he signed or that somebody exercised undue influence over him. She gave me the numbers. $7,500 to retain her. 18 to 24 months. Depositions, discovery, an expert on capacity, and a real chance of losing. As I was standing up, she said one more thing, not unkindly. The law can get you money, she said. It cannot get you a seat at a table. In the second week of August, a girl I used to work with texted me a screenshot. It was a photo of a garage, my brother's garage, with folding tables set up and a hand-lettered sign. Estate clean-out, everything must go. My mother's blue sweater was folded on top of the middle box. The post was 6 days old and it said sold in the comments, $200 for the lot. I drove out to the flea market and walked the whole building twice. A man told me the woman I wanted had not been in since July. I sat down on my sloped kitchen floor when I got back that night, and I finally said the true thing out loud to an empty room. I was not looking for money. I was looking for proof that I had been there. On a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of August, I ran the quarterly charge-off queue. I was checking for duplicate account numbers, and then my eyes went across a row and stopped. Mercer Raymond E. self-pay balance, $61,300, $214 days. His insurance had paid what insurance pays. The gap after the surgery and 11 weeks of skilled nursing had landed exactly where those gaps always land, on the family. My father had died owing a hospital more than the pencil marks on his kitchen doorframe were worth to anybody but me. I did not open his medical record. I have never done that to anybody. The billing data was all I looked at, and on the far right of that row was the field labelled guarantor. It said Mercer Dale R. I sat back in my chair. I remembered exactly where I had been standing when that happened. The 20th of August, admissions desk, 2nd floor. My dad was on a gurney in the hall with an oxygen line and a nurse who kept saying, "We are going to get you upstairs." Dale had the clipboard because Dale had gotten there first. The form has 2 places a family member can sign. One says authorized representative. The other says financially responsible party. Underneath that in 6-point type it says guarantor and personally liable. I put my finger on the page. I said, "Not that one, sign the one underneath it." He looked at me the way he has looked at me since I was 11. He said in front of the clerk, "She does this for a living, so she thinks everything is a trap." And he signed the top box. I went home and read my own employee code of conduct. It was clear. An employee may not acquire an interest in receivables sold by the system. An employee may not use non-public information for personal benefit. An employee may not work an account in which she has a personal or family interest. I sat at my kitchen table for a full hour, and I thought about how easy it would be to say nothing. The portfolio was going to be sold in September to a buyer in Louisville. I could wait 4 months, buy a small piece of paper from a third party, and there would be no report, no flag, no trail. I could have done that. It would have worked. And I would have spent the rest of my life explaining to myself why it did not count. At 1 in the morning, I opened my laptop. I typed my resignation effective in 2 weeks. I turned in my badge on the 11th of September and walked out to the parking lot. I have never felt so light in my life. I formed a single-member limited liability company on the 12th of September. I named it Hillrest Lane Holdings. On the 15th of September, I wired $3,678 to Halstead Receivables in Louisville for a tranche of accounts out of the Cumberland Ridge September book. I paid 6 cents on the dollar for paper with a face value of $61,300. The physical file came 4 days later. Bill of sale, chain of title, and a copy of the admissions paperwork from the 20th of August, with my brother's signature on it in the financially responsible party box. I laid all of it out on my kitchen table. Then I made one more phone call. I called the title company handling the closing on 118 Poplar Street. I asked a technical question. What happens to a residential closing if there is an open lawsuit against the seller for a substantial sum? She said the underwriter will not write clean title over an open claim that size. They would either kill it or hold the entire net proceeds in escrow until it resolves. I could end the sale of my father's house with a filing fee of $289. On the night of the 8th of October, I sat at the kitchen table until almost midnight with 2 envelopes. In the first one was a complaint drafted off a form, naming Dale R. Mercer as guarantor, demanding $61,300. In the second envelope was a payment agreement, the same template I had used at work for 7 years. I filled in the blanks by hand, 240 payments of $255 a month. No interest. First one due the 3rd of November. If he missed one, the consent judgment would go to the clerk that week and become a lien. At the closing, I walked into the title company with a banker's box. I told them I was the current holder of a charged-off account with a face balance of $61,300 that the seller had signed as guarantor. I pushed the second envelope across the table. I told them exactly what I wanted. Dale signs a consent judgment admitting the debt. He pays $255 a month for 240 months. If he misses one, the judgment gets filed. And then I told them the last condition. Before the keys change hands, he takes down the doorframe between the kitchen and the hall at 118 Poplar Street, the whole casing, pencil marks and all. He does it himself with his own tools alone, and he brings it to 214 Hillrest Lane. He took it. He came on the 16th of October. He carried the casing up my walk wrapped in a moving blanket. He did not come in the house. He stood on the doorstep and asked me where I wanted it. I said, just lean it against the wall in the kitchen. I have not decided yet. He carried it in and set it down carefully, both hands, the way you set down something in a hospital room. Then he stood there in my kitchen with his hat off and looked at all 20-some lines going up the left side. He said, there's more of them than I remembered. Then he put his hat on and left. He did not apologize. He has not apologized. I do not think he believes he did anything a man in his position would not do. But he stood in a rented kitchen with a slanted floor and counted the marks, and he came up with more than he remembered. That is not forgiveness. It is not even close. But it is the truest thing anybody in my family has said out loud since 1997. It is December now. I am still at 214 Hillrest Lane and the floor still slopes. The doorframe is leaned against the wall by the refrigerator. I have not decided where it goes. I put a folding table in the front room and I read people's hospital bills for them. If they can pay me, I charge by the hour. If they cannot, I do not. I paid 6 cents for that paper and it was mine to forgive. 9 of them I have not found yet. On the 3rd of every month, an envelope arrives with a check for $255. My brother's handwriting on the memo line gets smaller each time. I cash every one. Last week, my 7-year-old niece Nora asked me why there was a doorframe in the kitchen. I told her to stand up against it. She came up to the mark that said H95. I wrote her name beside it, N26. She asked what it meant. I told her it meant somebody remembered she was here. I spent 29 years paying down a debt nobody ever billed me for, and the only person on earth who could ever mark it settled was me. That is my story. 6 months, 1 doorframe, 240 payments. If you are the one in your family who shows up, does the driving, keeps the notebook, and never gets written down anywhere, start writing yourself down today.